Well, hello everybody. It's Monday night. It's time for a new tutorial. Today we're looking at AI path planning and how you can embed this into your Unity project. The astute amongst you will have realised that path planning is a component of assignment 1. So just like animation last week, I'm trying to teach you practical skills that will reinforce your knowledge of assignment 1. So path planning is the ability for an object, which we're going to call an agent, to go from a point to another point, and that point can be dynamic, meaning that it can change. 9 times out of 10 for the games you're going to build, that will be an enemy of some description trying to move towards your player. And that's what we're going to create today. Okay, so here's the structure of what we're going to be doing. Creating an empty project using the universal pipeline. We're going to import some assets, something to represent a zombie, our enemy. We're going to build up a simple environment. We're going to adjust the animation settings on our zombie because it will try and do its walk cycle by default, and we don't want that. We're also going to fix the material settings because the universal pipeline will affect the materials from assets that we import, so I need to show you how to resolve that. We're going to create a very simple environment using some basic assets that you can add to if you want. We're going to create a nav mesh, which is the surface on which our AI agents are going to move. We're going to fix the nav mesh settings, and we're going to set up the nav mesh agent, which is going to be our enemy, modify some scripting, and then set it up in the way that we want. So I've prepared one that we're going to replicate in a minute, but this is the basis of today's lesson. Is we're going to take a scene. I'm going to create something that looks along the lines of this and have an enemy that will move towards the player. The player in this context is represented by our main camera. So if we go back in game mode, we can see what it looks like from the perspective of our player. But in this example, the player's not going to be able to move. I can't use WASD to move around, but we can at least see the enemy moving towards it. And this works for as many zombies as you might like. So if I had a dozen zombies, let's just create loads and loads and loads of them. The AI agent system, which is called nav meshes, will just resolve this and they will work around each other. You'll notice that in this demo, I'm also using the scene window a lot. So even though the game can see what's going on, I care about what the scene can see. So I can test what's going on that my player can't directly see. And you'll see they'll walk around each other. They hopefully won't walk through one another. They will take a route to get where they're going, though it is possible for them to block each other, and they'll try and work around that in order to create an outcome that works. So from the perspective of our player, once they get there, they will stop. So stage 1 of today's tutorial is creating our empty project. So back inside of Unity Hub, we're going to create a new project. We're going to be using the core, using the universal 3D template. Make sure that the editor version is set to 6000.2.2 if it gives you a choice. I just happen to have a few installs on here. So universal 3D. We're going to call this project path planning. And we're of course going to choose source and repos as our location to store our project. Create project. This will take just a few moments, but nowhere near as long as last week's project did. Okay, once your project is opened, it obviously should look like this. First thing we always do with any project is press play, just to make sure there are no compiler errors, so let's do that. It's working as expected. I don't have any errors in the console, so that's worked perfectly. So we've created our empty project. Our next stage is going to be importing these assets that we want from our asset store. So window, package management, asset store. It should automatically sign yourself in if it hasn't done already. And the two assets that we would like is our zombie. So give zombie a search. If you can't find this exact zombie, make sure price is set to free. And it's the top zombie. It's well reviewed. It's a fantastic zombie. So that's the one we're going to have, though you can experiment later on with different types if you want. Once we've got that, you'll have an option to either download, import, add to your assets, whatever it says. We want to click that. We want to click open in Unity. It'll get added to your list, and then we can import to the project. It may have a download option before it says import, and then remember to click import, and that will take a moment. Done. You'll notice that the zombie folder has been added to our project, and we'll work with that in a moment. The next thing that we want from the asset store is a nice set of abandoned buildings. So back to the asset store. Buildings will get us where we want to go. Search for buildings or abandoned buildings. Set the price to free again. And the ones I like for my tutorials, are just these ones here. So abandoned buildings, I quite like these. There's a lot you can use if you wanted to. The reason what I like about these, if we add these to our project, is that they have an interior and you can customize them, and they're very much Lego style. You can add roofs to them, you can add parts to them. So let's add that to our project. And let's import. When you're dealing with a surface that we want to be for our character, we would like a floor for them to walk on. Now I'm going to create a game object, 3D object, and plane. This is going to be the flat surface that will represent our floor. You can keep its default grey colour if you want to, but I'm just going to right click in the empty asset space to create a new material. I'm going to have a yellow material, and I'm going to change the base map to yellow, and I'm going to drag and drop that on just so it stands out from a distance. That's all I'm doing. I'm also going to select the plane either by left clicking on it or choosing it in the hierarchy, and I'm going to change the scale to be 100 on the X and 100 on the Z, because if you change anything on the Y, nothing changes apart from it going inside out because it's got a depth of 0. Okay, so we've got a floor. We also want our abandoned buildings. So if I go into abandoned buildings and prefabs, you'll notice that everything in here is pink. So what we have to do here is resolve our material issues. If I dragged some of these assets into the game, they work, but they're pink. So what we're instead interested in doing is going to the abandoned buildings folder, finding the materials folder, and in there you'll find a bunch of materials that are pink. Now we want to change all of these settings to work with the universal render pipeline. Now we can do this one at a time, but that is faff. What we want to do is to select all of them. So left click the one on the left, shift left click the one on the right, and that will select everything in between, because you can't do a drag select. So you've got to do a left click, shift left click will select all of them. Then you can go to edit, rendering, materials, convert to URP, the universal render pipeline. That'll take a second, recalculate them, and fix the rendering problem. We'll have to do the same for the zombie in just a second, but once that's processed, you can use that technique for basically any asset from the store if it doesn't do what you want. So back to abandoned buildings, back to prefabs. Important you choose prefabs, not meshes, because prefabs have colliders, meshes don't. So in the prefabs folder, you'll now find some of these elements that we can use. So I'm going to slap this building in there. It'll go blue for a second while it compiles the shaders. Want another building, and that's enough if you just wanted to leave that there, or you can put a roof on them and adjust the roof so it's in an appropriate position if you really wanted to, but you don't have to do this for today's tutorial. But if you get a chance, make it look pretty. Okay, and you can have as many of these as you like. You want another abandoned building, you wanted to rotate it a bit, you want to stick some poles up, it doesn't matter. The fact is, create a little environment that you're happy with. The next thing we need is to put our zombie into the scene that represents our enemy. So back into the zombie folder, prefabs folder, and you'll notice we've got 3 zombies here that are all pink. We need to do the same fix to get them to work. So back to the zombie folder, back to the materials folder, and we're going to apply the same fix we just did. Either control left clicking or shift left clicking to select both of those. Edit, rendering, materials, fix. And then when we re-add our prefabs, I'm going to choose zombie 1, but there's not much difference between them. I'm going to slap zombie 1 in the scene. Somewhere in the middle, doesn't matter at all. And I'm just going to press play. Now, in this environment, in this game, there is not a player. Your player doesn't do anything. You can't WASD, you can't move around. That's not how this is set up. But we can just see through the eyes of the camera, and we can see in this case that our enemies completing a weird series of animations. But if I click on the scene tab, I can still move around the scene while the game is running and see what's going on. This is how you're going to do a lot of work today. The first thing we want to do is to leave play mode, and we're going to fix this zombie's fact they're playing the same animation over and over again. We don't want that. Now the easy fix is you can click into the zombie and just turn the animator off just by clicking that button. That means they will T-pose for the rest of the tutorial, and that's fine. We can work with that. If, however, you want it to be a little bit more complicated with this to implement a better fix, turn the animator back on, double click on the zombie controller, which is just there, double click to open it up, and this will look like what we saw last week. This is the animator state machine for this zombie, and you can see it's got an idle animation, an attack, a falling back, a walk in place, etc., and it loops around. That's what we can see our transitions are demonstrating. If you want to make this more interesting, grab the walk in place, left click and just move it to one side, right click, have that become the default, and then delete the transitions that come in and out of it. So now it will play walk in place forever. Back to the scene, let's give that a test. Do we like it? I can work with that. So, depending on your solution, this is where we are right now. We have imported our assets. We've got the zombie, we've got the environment, we've adjusted the animation settings. And in my case, I've also created a simple environment. Doesn't have to be complicated, okay? To create a nav mesh for this zombie to walk on, here's the thing that's a bit counterintuitive. We have to make an abstraction because all of this mesh, all of this complex surface, or potentially very complex surface, is too difficult for the computer to work out a path. When the game is run, it's too difficult. So we have to make an abstracted simplification for the path planning algorithm to use, and Unity calls that a nav mesh. So to create a nav mesh, right click anywhere in the hierarchy space to create an empty game object and call that game object nav mesh. It doesn't matter what it's called, but it's important, so let's call it nav mesh. As a component of nav mesh, we are now going to add a nav mesh surface is what we want. This will hold all the data about our newly created surface. To create the surface, just press bake. There we go, and you'll see that an area goes blue of all the acceptable places an enemy could go. Notice how they've created a no touching zone around this pillar where you can't walk through it. Same over here, and that's connected to the larger no touching zone around the building. But a lot of the buildings, if it's within the acceptability for an enemy to get there, such as over here, it's created an acceptable route for it to get up onto this surface, and it can now walk all the way around here, but it couldn't go across here. And that's a bit strange, because that's got enough height to go over there, but it's not letting it go up here. Same over here. I've got a space, but it's not letting it go up. And that's because the nav mesh surface here has a bunch of settings which are called the agent type. And that's what this cylinder here represents. How tall a step it can go up, in this case 0.75. And remember, units in Unity are measured in meters. So 0.75 meters, which is quite a significant jump up, can go up slopes of up to 45 degrees. And assumes it has a radius of 0.5 meter. And that's what this no touching zone is here. That will be 1/2 meter. So if the AI agent was there, it's never going to collide with that wall, is the intention. Now we can change these settings, or by using the abandoned prefabs that are already in here, we can add things like our stairs to create the environment a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to grab those stairs, I'm going to rotate them. And now, because I've made a change to my environment, I need to rebake my nav mesh. So back to the nav mesh object, rebake, and now it can get up those stairs. There's a way it can get up there, but it's still not quite enough to reach this area here. And some of that is because this door is too wide, or sorry, too narrow. So I can change the agent type here by clicking on the humanoid, open agent settings and saying, actually, I'm going to assume that it's a little bit thinner. And rebake. Does that solve our problem? Yes, it does. Now we can get inside of this building because it allows it to go through a narrower gap. And you can see that's also done it over here and over here. And we can get a little bit closer to these walls. You'll also notice the bit on the roof, because the roof is perfectly valid, but there's no way for the AI agent to get up there. But if I started an AI agent up there, it would be fair game. One last thing I'll show you about nav meshes. If you move any of these the assets, such as the buildings or the roofs, it doesn't change the nav mesh. Okay, really important. Anything you want to be a nav mesh has to be on an object that you know will never move, so is static. If you make a change, you've got to go back to your nav mesh and rebake it. So I've just moved that roof down, and we should see the nav mesh drop down with it. Okay, that is our nav mesh created. And you've seen that you can keep editing it and keep working with it to your heart's content. Now, we've just also fixed the nav mesh settings to adjust the, adjust the thickness and adjust the character. Now comes the interesting bit. The AI agent cannot use this nav mesh until we tell it that it is an AI agent. Okay, so with my zombie selected, I'm now going to add a component which is called a nav mesh agent. Give it a click, and that creates this cylinder, which is exactly the same as the cylinder that we had in our nav mesh settings before. So this zombie now has a kind of column around it that represents the how it's going to interpret and work with the nav mesh. This nav mesh agent does a bunch of work, but doesn't do anything by itself. If I press play, nothing should happen. Okay, it's just playing the animation like we saw before, but it's not moving anywhere because we haven't told it to. To do that, we're going to create a script. So with our zombie selected, we are going to add a new component, and we're going to make a new script, which I'm going to call AI follow. Remember, all one word because we can't have spaces in a script's name. So AI follow. It's going to be a new script. Create and add it, please. Put it in your assets folder. We could make a folder called called scripts, but I'm going to keep it quick for today. So we've got our AI agent, which has been created, and now we're going to double click on the AI follow script to allow us to customize it. To use AI features, that is an additional library which we are going to be using. So at the very top of our script, as well as using Unity Engine, we're going to do a line down, and we also want to be using Unity Engine .ai semicolon to say that you're done. It'll be grayed out because we're not using it yet, but we do want to use it. On line, in my case now 5, where I've got that semicolon, I'm going to press enter a few times to give me a bit of space. And now we would like a reference to a publicly accessible transform. The word transform here means information about something's position, rotation, or scale. Notice that transform has an uppercase T because it is an object, or a series of properties. And we're going to call this transform target, and then semicolon to say that you're done. What this represents is what's going to be our player. We're going to say every frame in the update loop, we would like to move towards our target. So remember, this script is attached to the zombie wants to move towards its target. So every frame, every update, we're going to get a component off of the zombie, open and close angle brackets, and then in the angle brackets, we're going to write the name of the component we want to get, which is of type nav mesh agent. Okay. Capital N, capital M, capital A for nav mesh agent. At the end of that, after you've got the angle brackets, we're going to open and close squiggly brackets, sorry, not squigglies, parentheses, open and close them, and then you can do dot. These are all the things we can do with our NavMesh agent's properties. Now remember, anything, I was using this one, anything that you can change here is a property that you can change through script. So if I wanted to change his speed, I could change dot speed. I could change it there. If I wanted to change their priority, their auto braking, their angular speed, their base offset, I can do that through code by using the dot operator to do base offset. But what we're interested in doing here is setting the destination, capital S, capital D, of the NavMesh agent. Open regular brackets, and we're going to close them as well. And in those regular brackets, we're going to choose the destination we're targeting. Target is where we're going to go. But target knows three things: the position, rotation, and scale of the thing that we're targeting. Now, I can't go towards something's rotation and I can't go towards something's scale. That doesn't make sense. But I can go towards the target's position. So I need to say target knows a bunch of data, dot position is the particular type of data we want to utilize here. Close parentheses, semicolon to say that you're done. Script finished. That is it. Give it a save, either with Control S or save. Back to Unity, it'll compile. And our script is now complete, but isn't quite yet set up. If I run this right now, I will get an error that will say it doesn't know what target is. Let's see what we get. Unassigned reference exception. The variable target of AI follow has not been assigned, which is true. I don't know what I'm targeting. Now what I want to do here is to make the main camera our target. So I'm going to drag main camera, holding down left click, putting it in the target slot, letting go. Or you can press the little circle and choose scene to find the main camera as well. Does the same thing. And wherever the main camera is, as long as there is a path that the AI agent can take from where it is to the object main camera, it will find it. Just like I've taught you in lesson, it's based on the A-star algorithm, so it will find a path, but it may not always be the most efficient, but it will be a path. Okay, so if I press play, and I'm going to click on the scene tab again, just so I can see what's going on. Should hopefully see my zombie goes towards my player at incredible speed. Far too fast for a zombie. So click on your zombie, make sure you're out of play mode, and you can fiddle with your NavMesh agent till you're happy with some settings. I find a speed of about 0.5 works well for our zombie, but whatever works for you. That looks pretty good. If you find that the AI agent is hovering and that's breaking the illusion, you can modify that by changing in the NavMesh agent. It has a base offset value which you can slide up or down, and that will change it relative to the NavMesh agent. Now, the real test is if I put the camera inside of a building, can it get there? And as long as there's a valid path for it to get there, it will do its best to do so. Okay, you get the idea. It's a slow zombie. I'm not going to wait for it, but I can assume it's going to get there. So we have set up the NavMesh agent, we've done scripting, and we've modified its settings to set it up. Just as one bonus fact though, you now find that in your hierarchy, you have a bunch of objects that are within your NavMesh and are a little bit messy. And you'll also find that NavMesh just is kind of by itself in this object. And also when you bake, it just grabs every object in the game and makes that as like a NavMesh, creates as part of the NavMesh. And maybe we don't want that. Maybe we don't want this roof to create a NavMesh. Maybe we don't want other enemies to be included. Because if I make a series of zombies, and I probably should move them. So let's just create a bunch of zombies in different positions. If I go back to my NavMesh and rebake it, It's clever enough to know that these are AI agents, so don't create a hole where they're standing. They're not an object, they're an agent. But if I were to set my player up with a collider or a capsule collider, which is what you'll have on your first-person controller, it will create a hole around that character where it started, and we don't want that behavior. So what is actually better to do is to take all of the objects that you want to be included in your nav mesh, including the plane, which is the floor, and make them a child of the nav mesh by dragging and dropping until it grays out, not the blue line, grays out. And now that's a child of nav mesh. But I don't want this roof to be included, so I'm going to move that out. So it's a blue line. So the roof won't be included as a nav mesh if I rebake it. Now, if I rebake, it won't care what I've just done, unless I go to Advanced Object Collision, and where it says here, collect objects, and it will do all game objects, everything. But I don't want that. I want to choose the drop down and go, no, mate. Only do everything in the current object hierarchy. So things that are children of this object are going to be in my nav mesh. Okay, current object hierarchy. Now if I rebake, hopefully the roof will no longer be a nav mesh. There we go. But the building it's attached to is. And that was because I moved it out from being a child of nav mesh. So have a test, see what you can get it to do, and make sure that you're happy with it as a working solution, and enjoy having some menacing zombies move towards your player. Good luck.